Have you ever wondered why sometimes fair value gaps do not work? Well, this is the right video for you. Stick around. I will go about explaining why fair value gaps do not work or get traded through sometimes and what to do in that specific instance. So this video will be about inversions, specifically inversions fair value gap. Like always, we will first look at the theory part and then after hop into the chart and look at a few examples. But before we start, we cannot talk about inversions without first mentioning fair value gaps. So let's briefly discuss fair value gap. So to start with, what is a fair value gap? Traditionally, we know that a fair value gap is a three candlestick pattern whereby the first candle's low does not overlap with the third candle's high in the term of. Okay, so let's talk about fair value gap. What is a fair value gap? Traditionally, we know that a fair value gap is a three candlestick pattern whereby the first candle's low does not overlap with the third candle's high. What does that mean? If you look at this, candle number 1, candle number 2, and candle number 3. If we drag out the first candle's low here and the third candle's high here, you realize there's a space in between whereby the low does not overlap with this high. So this constitutes a fair value gap, and with this is a CB because it's a bearish fair value gap. So in terms of a bullish fair value gap, we have the first candle's high, this high that does not overlap with the third candle's low. So we have the first candle's high here and the third candle's low here. So the space in between them is what is known as a fair value gap. So in terms of fair value gap, we have two different types. We have a BC, and we have a CB. This is buy side imbalance, sell side inefficient. The market was inefficient in a sell program. So here we have sell side imbalance and buy side inefficient. The market offered sell side price only but did not offer buy side. Okay, so now that we understand fair value gaps, let's go into inversions. So what is an inversion fair value gap? An inversion fair value gap is when a traditional fair value gap is not respected or is traded over, meaning that the next candle closes below or above the fair value gap, thereby invalidating the fair value gap and creating an inversion. What am I talking about? If you look at this, we have candle number 1, candle number 2, and candle number 3. In a traditional sense, we have this first candle's low here, and we have the third candle's high here. In a traditional sense, we have a fair value gap because the first candle's low does not overlap with the third high. So it creates a fair value gap. So what happens when it becomes an inversion? When this candle here does not respect this fair value gap and instead it gets traded over, it closes above this fair value gap, it closes above this first candle's low here. Then this fair value gap then now turns into an inversion. So that is what an inversion is. You have a traditional candle that is not respected or is traded through, meaning the market closes above or below. In this instant, the market closed above here. So now this is no longer valid as a fair value gap. You cannot trade this to take the market further down. So now you have to look into the change of state of delivery. So now we're looking to buy. Why are we looking to buy? Because the market has been offering higher price. We have this high here, which has been taken by this high here, creating a higher high. Then we have the market creating another high by taking out this high here. So the market took out this high to create a higher high here. And before it created this high, it created this higher low. So now we have instances where we know that the market, this becomes our draw on liquidity here. We know that this high has to be taken, but we have a fair value gap here. So this fair value gap is invalidated by this candle. Right? So now how do you trade this? How to trade the inversion fair value gap, you need some certain requirements. There are 5 in particular. So what is the first one? The first one is you have to have a liquidity rate. You have to have some form of sell stop or buy stop being taken. In this instance, because we're talking about inversion fair value gap in the bullish sense, we're going to talk about sell stop being rated. So we have this low here and this low here. So these are relative equal lows, relative equals lows, which becomes our sell side liquidity, our sell side liquidity here. So we have our sell side liquidity here, which has been rated by this candle. But and if you can see this, the rating of this sell side liquidity, the market is failing to close below the sell side liquidity. So it shows that it's showing us that it's taking only the liquidity before. That's the first requirement. Liquidity must be taken out of the market. And in this instance, we're talking about sell side liquidity. The second requirement is the market has to trade into some form of a PD array. What do we mean a PD array? We have different types of PD array. I will make a video about that. But the example of the PD array that we use in this example is we have a fair value gap here. We have a traditional fair value gap. Why is it a traditional fair value gap? The first candle's high here with the third candle's low here. They do not overlap. So they make this a fair value gap, a traditional fair value gap, right? So the market traded into a fair value gap and it respected this fair value gap because it didn't close below this fair value gap. So this gives us confirmation that because the market didn't close below this fair value gap, we can now look to buy. But do we buy here? If you go to a smaller time frame, because now I'm on 5, you go to the 3 and 1 minute, maybe you can find setup in here that you can use to take bullish position in here. But if you want to trade this fair value gap here, which turned into an inversion fair value gap, you wait for the market to turn and go away from this fair value gap here, right? Fair value gap here and close above. The third requirement is that we must have a singular fair value gap, a singular inversion fair value gap. So it does not help if you have this fair value gap here and it's traded through, and you have another fair value gap here and it was not traded through. So it can invalidate this fair value gap but respect this fair value gap. So you have to have a singular inversion fair value gap. So we have only one inversion fair value gap here. Yeah? The fourth requirement is that we must have a closure above or below the fair value gap. This is a closure above this traditional fair value gap, validating this inversion fair value gap and invalidating this fair value gap. Then the fifth requirement is you must have your draw on liquidity. What is our draw on liquidity? Because our sell side liquidity has been rated, now we know that buy side liquidity has to be rated. So this becomes our draw on liquidity. We have a draw on liquidity. This is where we know that the market is likely to go. We have a draw on liquidity. This becomes our draw on liquidity. This is our draw on liquidity. This is where we anticipate the market to go. And if you look further to the left, you can find other highs that you think the market will take. So this is our draw on liquidity. This is our closure above the fair value gap. And this is our liquidity rate. And this is our PD array that was respected. So what now do? You wait for the market. You wait for the market to return into the fair value gap or the inversion fair value gap. You either take a position at the open or at the 50% of the inversion fair value gap. You can take a position at the fair value gap and target your draw on liquidity and hide your stop loss below this candle here, below this candle, or you can take your position at the 50% of the inversion fair value gap and target your draw on liquidity, or you can target even further up. You can go left and look at this and target this liquidity up here, this relative equal highs. Then when the market comes to this first obvious draw on liquidity, you take your partials and you move your stop loss just above your entry point. Okay, guys, just above your entry point. So that's all that you do, guys. So now let's look at our second example. Okay, guys, for our next and final example, we're still on Nasdaq 100. we are going to use something which is different. We are not going to use a traditional PD array like an order block or a fair value gap or whatever. We're going to use what is known as an SMT. An SMT is a smart money technique. What that means is we have assets which are moving in tandem, meaning that they move in correlation to each other. You know that if this asset goes up, this asset should go down, or if this two asset, this one goes up and this one should go up here. So what we have is we have Nasdaq, which is US 100 and the US 500. Okay, so on the ES here, which is the US 500, you have the market making a lower low by breaking this liquidity point here. So liquidity was rated and the market made a lower low. So this becomes your sell side liquidity. This becomes your sell side liquidity and the market makes a lower low. So when ES makes a lower low, you go to Nasdaq and realize that Nasdaq failed to make a lower low. So this liquidity was not taken here. But if you understand smart money technique, you understand what SMT stands for. That means you know that when ES take out the liquidity and makes a lower low and Nasdaq failed to make a lower low, instead it makes a higher low, then you know that the market will go up because ES has taken liquidity but Nasdaq has not taken liquidity. So ES will force the market to go up. So now you go with the traditional liquidity in the form of ES, then you go to NQ, which is Nasdaq, and you look for the same setup. So what do you look for? So we can say traditionally our liquidity rate has occurred on ES, not on Nasdaq, but we're gonna take our trades on Nasdaq. So what that means, that step number one is fulfilled liquidity rate, but not on Nasdaq, but on ES. So now we have a fair value gap here, candle number one, candle number two, candle number three. We have a fair value gap here, and the fair value gap is traded this correctly. Yeah, we have a fair value gap here. First candle is low and that candle is high. So this candle here, the next candle here closed above this fair value gap. Closed above this fair value gap. If you can see here, the closure of this candle is above this. So now we know that the second requirement is met because the next candle closed above the fair value gap. Now the fair value gap is invalidated. Now we have what is known as an inversion fair value gap. Now this becomes our inversion fair value gap, right? So the third requirement is a singular fair value gap. So we don't have any fair value gap that was not traded through here. We have a fair value gap here, which can be our target. But if you check this one has been traded because we have a fair value gap here. The market tapped and went further to attack this sell side liquidity here by going into this fair value gap and going further. So now this is invalidated because it was traded, right? So now this becomes your draw on liquidity. Fair value gaps are not liquidity, by the way, guys. Some people are saying fair value gaps are liquidity, but these are not liquidity. So this becomes your target, but this is your main draw on liquidity because it's the obvious draw on liquidity because we have relative equal highs, right? So what do? Your fourth requirement is your draw on liquidity must be very clean. This is our draw on liquidity, relative equal highs, right? So what do you do now? You wait for the market to close above, then you take your position, your buy position, either at the open or at the 50% of the fair value gap. Let's take the position at the 50%, then you target this draw on liquidity here. And where do you hide your stop loss? You hide your stop loss just above this low or just above this, just below this candle, just below the first candle here. Then what happens when you come here is you take your position here, you buy here, and when the market comes to this 50% of this fair value gap, you take partials and you move your stop loss just above this high. Because what? This is a protected low, the market cannot come here. What do I mean? Why do we have to use this high here? Because if you can see, we have a fair value gap here that the market can come into this fair value, can retrace into this fair value gap before taking out this draw on liquidity. But this cannot be your only target. You can even target fair up on the left. Look at this fair value gap and target that. Go up and look at this. Look at highs and lows and you target that. Okay, guys. So that's all that you need to know about inversion fair value gap. So to quick recap, If an inversion fair value gap is when a traditional fair value gap gets traded through, or the next candle that comes after the fair value gap closes above or below the fair value gap, right? We have 5 requirements. We have to have a liquidity rate. The market has to trade into a PD array. The candle must close above or below the fair value gap, the traditional fair value gap. It must be a singular fair value gap, and the draw on liquidity must be clean. That you must not have any question that this is your draw on liquidity. So guys, that's the end of my video about inversion fair value gap. So I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this video, guys, please subscribe, like, and let's engage in the comment section. Give me ideas about future videos or whatever you want to see on the channel. I will fulfill your wishes. Without further ado, peace out, guys.